Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. Death toll from Storm Daniel in Libya rises to over 5,000. It's being called a disaster of epic proportions. 145 Egyptians washed out to sea by floods in Libya are returned home. And residents of Talat Yaqub in Morocco complain of slow response to deadly 6.8 magnitude quake as death toll climbs to almost 3,000 people. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers in Lagos. It's been a devastating couple of days for people in Libya after Tropical Storm Daniel swept through the eastern part of the country. Emergency workers and residents are continuing to dig through rubble to look for survivors and the dead. More than 5,300 people have been killed and about 10,000 reported missing in a disaster the United Nations has called a calamity of epic proportions.
Libya is calling for international help to recover more bodies from the sea. The country is still trying to process this disaster after Tropical Storm Daniel left over 5,300 dead and about 10,000 more missing.
We do not need aid, not even medication or equipment, no doctors or ambulances. Thanks to God, we have 400 ambulances that took off. But we have a problem in retrieving the bodies from the sea. The Libyan Navy, drivers and frogmen are putting all their efforts into retrieving the bodies.
The city of Derina, home to 125,000 people, was devastated by Storm Daniel that pushed through dams on the river that runs through it, sweeping away buildings and wiping out as much as a quarter of the town. One resident, Mufasa Salem, said the flood happened so fast at night.
Then we
heard that the dam had burst and the water had flooded the area. People were asleep and no one was ready. We lost 30 people so far, 30 members of the same family. We haven't found anyone.
In the meantime, Turkish and Emirati planes carrying aid arrived in the country, carrying shipments of food, medical supplies, rescue boats and shelter. Similarly, Algeria followed suit as rescue teams arrived to help with rescue operations. But that's not all, as Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi sent medical aid, personnel and equipment as part of humanitarian assistance. Egyptian Red Crescent personnel and first responders were seen embarking planes to be sent to Libya. It's the same show of support as a Palestinian rescue team from the Civil Defense, the Ministry of Health, and the Red Crescent left for Libya to take part in the search and rescue mission. Pope Francis expressed his sorrow as he led a general audience in St. Peter's Square, praying for victims of the massive flooding.
Benedicat vos, omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sanctus.
Amen.
So far, more than 1,700 bodies have been recovered, and officials expect the death toll will be much higher.
In the meantime, the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies is asking for international assistance to deal with the aftermath of the floods in Libya. The storm reached a peak in northeastern Libya on September 10th with strong winds of 70 to 80 kilometers per hour. This caused communications interruption, the fall of electricity towers and trees. Torrential rains of between 150 to 240 millimeters caused flash floods in several cities, and entire neighborhoods in Libya's eastern city of Derna have disappeared along with their residents in a storm unprecedented in Libyan history. The Libyan government has announced 3 days of mourning in all the affected areas.
Torrential rain to an area affecting at least 1.5 to 1.8 million people. And we are doing, and it's also damaged hospitals. It's wiped out some hospitals, left some partially functioning. Our second priority is to look at the needs of people who are displaced. It's already mentioned that there are lots of people who are already living in precarious circumstances. And we have to look at what kind of field hospitals can be set up, what kind of mobile clinics. So there's a great deal of work that needs to be done and is being mobilized as I speak.
The humanitarian needs are huge and much more beyond the abilities of the Libyan Red Crescent and even beyond the abilities of the government. That's why the government in the East has issued the international appeal for support.
There are roughly 600,000 migrants in Libya at this time. Now, we're conscious that in some of the affected areas, there are migrant populations, but it's at this early stage, and with the many access issues that we and the humanitarian responders are facing, we don't have a clear picture about how badly they have been affected. But as part of the general population, you would expect that the same impacts that the residents of that area have experienced over the last 24 hours will, of course, impact on the migrants who are living there as well.
And the flooding in Libya has affected many people who are already vulnerable, including thousands of migrants. Libya is home to approximately 600,000 migrants, some of whom are in the affected communities. The UN agency spokesman, Paul Dillion, also says it's not yet clear just how badly they have been affected, but considering Libya is a transit country for migrants from over 40 countries heading for Europe, the situation could be dire. Overall, the World Health Organization estimates that over 1.8 million people have been affected by the floods. Meanwhile, 145 Egyptians have been killed in the deadly floods in Libya. The bodies of the deceased were picked up by local coast guards after being washed out to the sea from Derna. Authorities in eastern Libya have sent the 145 bodies back to their home country, Egypt. According to officials, many Egyptians with an estimated number of 140,000 live and work across the border in Libya, making them the second largest migrant group in the country. Well, joining us virtually from Cairo in Egypt is VOA correspondent Edward Uranian. Hello, Edward. Good to see you today. Not very pleasant circumstances, I must say.
Thank you, Joka. Very sad, and it's getting sadder by the moment as the numbers continue to rise. Egypt is just part of the tragedy. The Egyptians that died were really a small part of the total in this area of eastern Libya. Also, we're hearing that a lot of these numbers are not solid because there's another town that was cut off from communications near Darna, which was the worst hit, and that of Susa, and they're just getting their fingers on the scope of the tragedy there. But here in Egypt, it was mostly a community south of Cairo, young people from an area around Bani Suef, south of Cairo, that were affected, that were killed, and their bodies were brought back. And video on Arabia TV showed women wailing, ambulances bringing the bodies, and people carrying coffins on their heads. So it was a sad spectacle here, but nothing compared to what they experienced in eastern Libya.
There's cautiousness going on in Egypt now. I can imagine, as meteorologists forecast that the storm would hit Egypt next? Mentioning that the cities of Shalom, Siwa, and Makro particularly. So what's happening in Egypt at this point? Is the government worried that the storm will hit hard?
Well, we got mostly a windstorm in the aftermath of the Libyan portion of the disaster. We had heavy winds here in Cairo yesterday. Alexandria got a lot of rain Monday and into Tuesday. But I didn't hear a lot that there were a lot of casualties. And the storm itself has mostly blown off. I mean, blown off in the sense that there are still some winds. There's a lot of dust in the air. But nothing is actually happening in terms of rain or precipitation.
And rightly so. Is this Egypt or Libya said that it hasn't seen this kind of storm in decades, and this is Africa. Many are saying that it could be as a result of climate change. Was the country expecting this to happen? Has anything like this happened before, of this devastating nature in Libya?
Well, this is the first time that any of these dams collapsed in eastern Libya. 2 major dams collapsed. And I'm hearing Arab news channels say there's a 3rd dam that could potentially collapse, causing many more victims, but we're hoping that the waters will recede very soon. The Interior Ministry in eastern Libya said that it issued warnings at least 2 days in advance, saying that this was going to be a bad storm. And this part of eastern Libya gets heavy rains this time of year anyway. But the scope of the storm was unprecedented by Libyan history. I noticed that in Nigeria, you had 600 people who died in flooding last year. I mean, this is potentially, they're saying that it could up to 20,000 people. I mean, that's unconfirmed, but many people were lost, and you're not going to find those people because they're nowhere to be found at this point. So they're probably dead.
Right. And let's talk about the emergency response to this. The International Red Cross and Red Crescent is saying that it cannot handle, this crisis alone. What does this say about the scale of damage, displacement, and, of course, potential, disease, as well as what it would take to recover from this damage?
Well, I mean, the international organizations like to talk because that's their job, but the scope of this disaster is really beyond anyone's ability to cope, especially the people who are on the ground now. It's unlikely that anyone is going to bring in the equipment that's needed to really do what could be done. And these people have already died, so it's not really going to help the people who drowned and who were carried away by the waters. In terms of rebuilding the city, it's not a very popular city. Darna is an Islamist stronghold, and many Arab countries don't like it. Egypt is not very fond of it. Even the Eastern Libyan military fought a major battle there to take control of the city a couple years ago. So in terms of allocating funds to rebuild the city, it's not going to be very easy to do, to be honest with you.
Right. Edward, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Joka.
And still to come on the program, Nigeria's Minister of Interior promises to speed up passport processing and collection. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Rescuers are racing against time to find survivors as the death toll from Morocco's deadliest earthquake in more than 6 decades rose to almost 3,000 people. Rescue teams and search dogs have been picking through rubble in the rural town of Talat Nyakub, east of the epicenter of Friday's devastating earthquake.
Residents who lost their homes in Talat Nyakub, east of the epicenter of the devastating earthquake, have slept in the open air or in tents set up by authorities to give temporary shelter. But some residents have criticized the government's relief efforts, saying that while other communities had received assistance, they have had to fend for themselves, including searching for survivors and pulling bodies out of the rubble. Finally, 4 days after the quake, locals of Talat Nyakub received long-awaited aid. Villagers in parts of Morocco, devastated by the country's biggest earthquake in over a century, camped outside for a fourth night, as the death toll rose to more than 2,800 people, with over 2,500 people injured. Search teams from Spain, Britain, and Qatar are joining Morocco's rescue efforts. The epicenter of the quake was about 72 kilometers southwest of Marrakesh, where some historical buildings in the old city and a UNESCO World Heritage Site were damaged. Meanwhile, rescue workers have recovered a body from under the rubble. In the hard-hit town, dozens of Moroccan troops, search and rescue workers, and medical personnel are looking for buried people and assisting survivors. Many of the traditional mud brick houses that are common in the mountain villages have crumbled into rubble, devoid of air pockets, dwindling hopes of finding survivors underneath. The International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, IFRC, has launched an emergency appeal to raise 100 million Swiss francs, about $112 million, to support victims of the earthquake in Morocco. The 6.8 magnitude quake, which struck late on Friday in the high Atlas Mountains, is Morocco's deadliest in 60 years, and so far, more than 2,800 people have been killed in it.
And in the strongest seismic event to hit the Moroccan kingdom since 1960, initial reports suggested approximately 100,000 children may have been impacted. Like all major earthquakes, aftershocks are likely to continue in the days and weeks ahead, putting children and families at further risk. It's no surprise that at the time the magnitude 6.8 quake struck about 11 p.m., most children and families were at home asleep. The United Nations estimates that more than 300,000 people may have been affected in Marrakesh and in the high Atlas Mountains, and concerns are high that the number may increase. While UNICEF doesn't know the exact number of children killed and injured as yet, latest estimates from 2022 indicate that children represent almost a third of the population in Morocco. Updates from the coup in the Niger Republic, where the military junta says it would end a military pact with neighboring Benin Republic. In an announcement on state television, Colonel Major Amadou Abdurrahmani said that the new junta has decided to denounce the military cooperation agreement with Benin Republic, accusing it of authorizing the deployment of troops for a possible military intervention against Niger by the West African Regional Bloc. The ECOWAS bloc is trying to negotiate with the leaders of the coup, but has said that if diplomatic efforts fail, it's ready to use force as a last resort to restore constitutional order and reverse the July 26 coup. Now to the conflict in Sudan. The United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk says hundreds of people have been killed in the West Darfur region in ethnically motivated attacks perpetrated by the Rapid Support Forces and allied militia. Bloodshed, violence and displacement have escalated since fighting between the Sudanese army and RSF erupted in April, bringing the country to the brink of civil war.
And in West Darfur, ethnically motivated attacks perpetrated by the RSF and allied Arab militias have resulted in the deaths of hundreds of so-called non-Arab civilians, primarily from Masalit communities. This has mainly occurred in the capital, El Janina, but also in at least 8 other locations. The RSF now controls all but 2 localities in West Darfur. Such developments echo a horrific past that must not be repeated. We also see worrying signs of involvement in the conflict of militia, often affiliated along tribal or ethnic lines. Mobilization campaigns by the SAF pose a real risk of sparking intercommunal tension and triggering even further conflict between communities. I'm repulsed to hear of the ongoing epidemic of conflict-related sexual violence. As of 10 September, my office has received credible reports of 45 incidents involving at least 95 victims, including 75 women, 1 man, and 19 children. This is likely to be the tip of the iceberg. Reports are mainly coming from Khartoum State and the Darfur and Kordofan regions, and the majority of perpetrators, around 78%, have been men in RSF uniform or armed men affiliated with the RSF.
And on the humanitarian crisis, over 400,000 people have fled the war-torn Sudan and crossed into Chad. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, during a 4-day visit to Chad, witnessed a dire humanitarian situation and is pushing for further international support to cater for those displaced due to the prolonged war.
We estimate that we need 4 to 5 more new sites to disengage this population and bring it to a safer place. And I am here on a joint visit with the World Bank. Why? Because the World Bank is the prime development institution, and we must not just look at the short term, at the humanitarian, which is the priority, but also at the medium term, education investment, livelihoods, support to the host communities that are making a big sacrifice by hosting people here. And this is why we're looking at both short and long term together with the World Bank during this very important visit.
We end the program here in Nigeria in what appears to be good times for those seeking to secure international passports. The Minister of Interior, Olubunmi Tunji-Ojo, says a total of 60,000 passport backlog has been cleared within 4 working days. This comes after the minister earlier directed the agency to clear all pending passport applications as quickly as possible. The minister disclosed this while receiving the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, Dr. Betta Edu, on a courtesy call. According to Dr. Edu, the visit was informed by the need to extend a hand of partnership to collaborate with the Ministry of Interior as it seeks to drastically reduce human trafficking and other related challenges, including poor veterans' welfare, underemployment, and poverty amongst citizens.
The issue of the passport, I know people would love to hear that. I repeat myself for the uptake time, and I'm not apologetic about it. It's completely unacceptable in Nigeria for us to be treated as if being a Nigerian is not a right. Your passport is your national document. It is your right. Since last week, the ministry, when we stepped into this, precisely on the 6th of September 2023, we had 204,332 backlogs. As of today, even though I've still spoken to them, I'm not comfortable with the pace at which they are going. And they have assured me if they need be, they will do shifts, they will put in more effort, which they have to do, because we've promised Nigerians 2 weeks. And just as we know the president is a man that when he gives his word, he goes all the way to make sure that he keeps his word. We've given 2 weeks, and we are not going back on the 2 weeks. Within the last 3 to 4 working days, we've been able to clear 59,906 backlogs. We still have 144,426, which, of course, all our passport offices, I have the breakdown of what the numbers that we have in every passport office. It's not just giving me details. I can tell you in Ikeja, this is what we still have. In Alausa is Ikeja, this is what we have. In Ikoyi, this is what we have. In Ibadan, this is what we have. In Calabar, this is what we have. I can tell you that right now, because we are on top of the matter, and we are not going back into this. And once we clear this backlog, no Nigerian, and I repeat, no Nigerian should wait for 2 weeks before getting a passport.
Well, that's our program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.